my name is Imogen Parsons. I'm the Acting Director, Terrorism and Conflict at RUSI at the moment. I'm also a career civil servant on secondment with experience in the MOD, the Foreign Office, the Department of International Development, and the Cabinet Office. So I am delighted to be with you chairing this panel. This one is going to focus on integration within the military and across government. You've heard already about why we need multi-domain integration, why it's so vital to enable us to tackle the threats of the 21st century. You've heard in broad terms about the approach and what it seeks to achieve. You've heard from the Defence Secretary on the importance of focusing on policy and campaigning, and from General Patrick Saunders on the importance of cross-government integrated approaches. So what we're going to do on this panel is dive a bit more into the operational and the practical, into the nuts and bolts, if you like. You'll hear more about what multi-domain integration looks like in practice, what challenges it poses to commanders, what it looks like in particular contexts, and how we'll need to work differently across government to optimise this approach. I am delighted to introduce our highly experienced panel. First of all, Lieutenant General Rob Magowan, Deputy Commander of UK Strategic Command and the Defence Senior Responsible Owner for Multi-Domain Integration. Next, we'll hear from Lieutenant General Dennis Crall, who I hope will be joining us online. I see a placeholder for him. He is beaming in from the United States, so we're very pleased to have him, and will bring his experience of how the US has tackled this challenge. He is the Director, Command, Control, Communications and Computers and Cyber. He's also the Chief Information Officer, Joint Staff J6. He brings a wealth of experience, including as Deputy Principal Cyber Advisor and Senior Military Advisor for Cyber Policy. We'll then move to Lindsey Cameron, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the National Cyber Centre, part of GCHQ. She was previously Director General of the Northern Ireland Office and previously Director General for Country Programmes in DFID. She's also worked in the Cabinet Office and is a graduate of RCDS, among others, so also brings a wealth of cross-government experience. Finally, Professor Anthony King, Chair of War Studies, University of Warwick. Anthony has just completed a trilogy on Western military transformation in the 21st century and has been a mentor and advisor to the British Army and the Royal Marines for nearly 2 decades. He is uniquely well placed to engage in this discussion, and we look forward to his constructive insights and critique. I'll remind everybody of the attribution rules, please. The prepared remarks are on the record. The Q&A that follows is off the record. I'll come to each of you in the audience who want to take questions and take questions online, and I'll go through the mechanics of that once we reach that point. With that in mind, can I ask you to start, please? Thanks, Imogen.
Well, as Imogen said, we're deliberately going to the operational level. And what I've written on this piece of paper here is multi-domain integration from buzzwords to an operational execution golden thread. So that's my challenge in the next 8 or 9 minutes to see if we can find that golden thread. So let's go back to the Russian incursion into Syria in 2015, and let's assess whether what I'm about to describe, which I think is quite familiar, if that is what we aspire to. Is that our benchmark in terms of multi-domain integration? So we saw the insertion of Russian special forces into Syria by air in support of the Syrian army. We saw the establishment of an integrated air defense system across Syria, creating quite a formidable anti-access area denial zone, or A2AD as we call it. We saw the launch of cruise missiles from the Caspian Sea into northern Syria. We saw the posturing of missile-capable Russian submarines in the Eastern Mediterranean, electromagnetic jamming of anything that got anywhere near the so-called Russian Joint Operating Area of Syria. We saw the delivery of unmanned aerial operations in direct support of kinetic strikes throughout Syria, particularly in the north. No doubt intelligence collection from space. We can't be sure, but I'm sure that's the case. We saw a really efficient build-up of logistic support, both through Tartus Port and the Bashar al-Assad Air Base, both in terms of build-up and sustainment. And we saw the sophisticated, coherent, and politically led from Putin information campaign in support of President Assad that brought the whole thing some coherence. All of what I've just described was pretty much happening at the same time. So is that the MDI standard? Well, I would say that was multi-domain activity. Now, there was some integration there, of course, but to me, it was a series of binary actions to showcase, and they really were showcasing Russian military power, but also demonstrating some pretty powerful strategic intent. It was very effective, though, and crucially, it had powerful political cohesion, as I've just said. But we need to develop a much more sophisticated MDI approach if we're going to compete with that in the future, and if necessary, fight to defeat it. So if we just remind ourselves what multi-domain integration is formally, and then you can judge for yourself how you think the Russians did in 2015 and how we're doing today. So it's the posturing of military capabilities in concert with other instruments of national power, allies and partners, and it's configured to sense, understand, and orchestrate effects at the operational tempo across all operational domains and all levels of warfare. So it's quite a mouthful. So what I want to do over the next 6 or 7 minutes is pick on 5 areas where I think we need significant development if we're going to match that definition and meet the adversarial challenge that we've seen played out in the last 5 or 6 years. So the first one, and Sean absolutely touched on this, but let me see if I can take the argument a bit further, is influence in this so-called cognitive domain. And as we well know, that success is not solely defined by battlefield victories and our perception of the world as being manipulated at an extraordinary pace and at a previously unimaginable scale. Therefore, success demands on a more sophisticated, more preemptive, more imaginative approach in the cognitive domain, as we discussed this morning. We need to identify strategic areas of interest and start laying the foundations of pan-government information campaigns now. Quite a deliberate approach. Defense-only effort in this environment isn't going to work. If you compare it against what the Russians were doing in Syria in 2015 and beyond, a defense-only lead is going to be suboptimal. We also, and Johnny, who's just left, raised this a little bit just before lunch, we need to be bolder in this environment. We're too focused on countering disinformation rather than selecting our own narrative and consistently communicating it over a longer period of time. And selective use of information and its targeting in certain areas of the cognitive domain, that's not illegal. And we need to be much more flexible, I think, in our approach. So audience analysis needs to become embedded in our planning. This takes expertise and deep regional understanding and outreach to ensure we have the right experts in the room and in the country in question. Now, this must be matched by the ability to develop cognitive targets at speed and with a degree of accuracy regarding effects and collateral damage. And we should prioritize those areas of investment now. We need to be able to call out the adversary, to attribute illegal or unethical activity across the information environment. And this will take investment in our ability to trace network activity. The totality needs to be orchestrated as a single campaign over days, months, years, if necessary, and in concert with many others beyond defense, as I mentioned, with defense probably in a supporting role, rather than, as we would say in the military, supported. And defense has, I think, conceptually at least, started this journey through the so-called integrated action terminology that we used in the IOPC. And it's part of our defense doctrine. But integrated action to deliver behavioral outcomes in a target audience is what I'm talking about here, with information and its exploitation at its heart. So that's the first thing. The second is multi-domain command and control in this environment. So our command and control, our military command and control, is going to be much more dispersed than it is today. Otherwise, it will be destroyed or targeted. It needs to be flatter and hyperlinked. Deployed commanders need more autonomy, more agility to respond without constant upward permissions for approval, which is too slow in today's hyper-connected world. We need to develop redundancy across this command and control network because nodes will be disrupted. We need to improve the data feeds into these nodes from all domains and access so-called cloud at the combat edge. Now, accessing cloud at the combat edge is going to be a technical challenge, an acquisition challenge, something we talked about this morning with the Secretary of State, and definitely a security challenge. These nodes will need a much more sophisticated intelligence function, an ability to bring in open source intelligence, space feeds, air breathing feeds, all sorts of different intelligence feeds into the command node, probably forward as well as back, certainly more forward than we currently do today to ensure that agility. So the third point of the 5 is MDI through persistent engagement and competition. So persistent engagement and competition is used a lot in the integrated operating concept documentation, but we need to ensure that we deliver this deliberately through design. And this requires a campaigning approach from both a military perspective and pan-government that Pete talked about this morning. The Russians are still in Syria, and it doesn't look like they're leaving. The Russians are a challenge in the North Atlantic, and I would say the threat is not diminishing. It's probably getting worse. So these campaigns are long campaigns. That persistency needs to come through in our planning. Now, we need to translate the doctrine of MDI into operational design, operational art, and across the operational domains. So we need handrails and guidelines, not only for our commanders, but particularly for our staff officers, and a much more sophisticated conversation, as we were talking about this morning, across government and with allies. And Dennis is going to talk a little bit about that, I'm sure, when he comes on. Fourth point, full spectrum targeting. So what I mean by this is we need to think of adversary targets as part of a total system and attack the vulnerable points, because the obvious targets, Bashar al-Assad Air Base, are very, very difficult to penetrate. But it's not A2AD everywhere, so there is hope. So this requires a deep understanding, and we need to accept that that takes a long time, years probably, to understand, but we need to start now. So we need to engineer a failure in their supply lines, their communication links, maybe their satellite links, but we need to think about the legal implications of so doing and what the second order consequences might be. But we need to invoke a culture and discipline of target systems analysis, pan-domain. Now, we do this already, but it needs to be broadened and deepened. And TSA needs to become second nature, and it needs to be deep into our PME. Now, critically, orchestration of soft and hard effects across this spectrum needs to become core business. And we prosecute these actions now, but we need to think about it in that spectrum approach. So let me just paint a very quick scenario of what we mean by multi-domain integration in this cross-spectrum approach. It's not really about those 5 domains. So in a particular theatre, we want to prosecute special operations to destroy a missile defence site. We want to conduct an offensive cyber action to disrupt a critical comms link, which has probably been in years in the design. We want to incite a protest against a key political figure inside someone else's state. We want to take down a bridge in that state using a proxy force to disrupt a critical supply chain. And we want to wrap that up in a strategic level, cross-government, pan-allied narrative. So that's getting much closer to MDI. So I'm just going to quickly finish on the last one, which is EME. And we need to develop a much closer understanding of the electromagnetic environment and how cyber sits within it. We need to improve our education of it and of our understanding of that as a totality of a spectrum. So if we target these areas for development, and no doubt others, then we have the golden path to MDI. And against the backdrop of the IR, we have a tremendous opportunity to realize it. And the threat demands that we must. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Right, with no further ado, we'll move on to our next speaker, which is Lieutenant General Dennis Crall, who I think you can all see on the screen over there for those in the room. And hopefully those of you watching on C+, he will appear for you in just a second.
I don't know if you can hear or see me.
Yes, I think so. Are we all, yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Well, first, I will say I regret that I could not make my appearance in person for 2 reasons. One, certainly I think the personal interaction is critically important to solve some of these problems. And 2, just to be honest, I'll do anything to get out of the Pentagon, even for a short visit, and that is a fact. But I'll do my best from remote. But that those opening comments certainly resonate extremely well with me, and I'd like to just maybe pile on a few of these and add a little bit of clarification from our perspective on maybe how we're viewing this multi-domain problem set and some of the things that we have in works, and why I'm a little more optimistic maybe now than I would have been even a year ago. So in the opening comments, it certainly is no doubt, when I look at all the inhibitors, all the challenges that we have facing our ability to move against what I believe will be the next fight, the current fight, will be this idea of time. We can solve almost everything when it comes to the various features required in building up our warfighting prowess. But the one aspect of this modern fight, this digital fight, this fight aided by machine learning, AI, hypersonics, and the like, is time. And if you don't act in time, even if you can sense and make sense of your environment, if you can't push that decision or have that decision at the tactical edge in a time of relevance, then it clearly is irrelevant. And we have always graded ourselves in the past, I think, very friendly and favorably, meaning that we looked at these as a declining scale of so much effort equals so much reward. And we would give ourselves letter grades, where I may be at a B now, but with a small improvement, I may get an A. I believe, though, we have quite a different environment. I believe the grading scale is binary. I don't think there are gradients. Either we can act in a timely manner or we don't. And that cutoff is more and more pressing for what that means to take sensor data, to push that through some level of analysis or prediction, move that to the warfighter who can make that decision, and then have that decision transmitted in a time for those to act. And whether that's humans in the loop, machines in the loop, or a combination of both, time is our biggest challenge. And in almost every exercise and rehearsal that I've been a part of or witnessing, we've got a lot of work to do to meet that time challenge. The other aspect that I think that came up in opening remarks, which really resonate with me, we seem to not appreciate the difference between competition and conflict and where our adversaries see themselves in that continuum. In fact, I participated in a lot of forums like this over the past year, where I think the mantra has been really working to keep our adversary in the competition phase and preventing us to going from conflict. And what I find interesting is that while we're trying to lock the door from the outside and keep them in, they're locking the door from the inside, because that's exactly where they want to be. There's a lot of reward in the competition space, and I don't think we appreciate that. When you look at the effects on our supply chain, defense industrial base, theft from academia and research, it's an incredibly lucrative environment where the fight is already on. And we've seen our adversary work with great success in that space. So I would ask, if there's so much success in that area, where is the pressure to move forward and elevate? We've got to appreciate the nature of the fight we're in today, not just thinking something is coming around the corner. When it comes to what we would classify as information operations or information warfare, I completely agree that there's a lot of work to be done in that space as well. I think the term used was the single campaign, and that's exactly right. And the layout that was given, the vignette, I think is a great one, to look at the integration challenges we have of making these things work. And again, I would argue the enemy in that process for us is time. There is nothing more time consuming than seeding information operations early on so that they work at the time and place of our choosing. No more frustrating to a campaign planner to have no planning in that space. And then as you reach the line of departure to execute an operation, have somebody show up and say, you know what, why don't we sprinkle some information operations on that? At that stage, all you have is hypnotism. There is no opportunity to really go back and seed the environment to have these things work. This is a concerted, long-term, consistent effort that I believe has to be looked at through three lenses. The first lens is authorities. We know that these things don't behave like other forms or elements within our warfare arsenal. They don't have the casualty radius that a weapon system would be that we could map. They may travel around the globe in seconds because they're digitally aided. And we have to understand that we have to take risk in this area. We take risk in the kinetic side, but we seem to be risk adverse on the information side. And that really hurts us in our ability to exercise. So time comes back to us again in the authorities piece. We need to make sure that those are laid flat and we understand how to work outside of the area of hostilities to treat these things as traditional military activities. The second lens I look through this is our process. It means nothing to have the authorities if the process is too slow to execute in a timely manner. And I don't mean just by nation, but with countries. I should be able to leverage my partners, their authorities, with maybe my capabilities and vice versa. And we have to have processes in place that allow us to execute at speed. And right now, those processes are cumbersome and extremely time consuming. And lastly, I think my biggest concern comes in capabilities. I can't speak for the UK, but I can certainly speak for the United States when I say that we have lost much of our capability in the information operations communities. We no longer build the professionals that we used to 15 and 20 years ago. We no longer have consistent team builds, schoolhouses, throughput of these professionals. They have atrophied over the years. And you certainly don't gain competence and confidence in these skill sets if you don't have the trained workforce. We're taking steps to correct it, but this will take time to get us there. This requires professionals to do this, not amateurs. And I think the comment was made, knowing your target audience, know how to look at measures of effectiveness so we can account and adjust for the type of activities that we do. Again, it takes a professional workforce to get there. And the last comment that I would make is that this is all about the tactical edge. We spend a lot of time in working with close partners with our chief information officers, our chief data officers, our chief technology officers, all of whom they all play an important role in the solution set that we have. But the risk and the tendency of really starting at the garrison side hurts us. We need to ensure that when we bring on technology like network reform, and we start looking at how we do tactical edge processing rather than reach back models, how we make the zero trust a reality and identity management a thing that can follow you on the battlefield. We don't need to start in garrison and then eventually work our way to the fighting hole. We actually have to start at that tactical edge fighting hole and work our way back to the flagpole. Because if it doesn't work on the tactical edge, I don't think we have any business pursuing it. So, here in the US, we've recently been able to, through the DoD, move our joint all-domain command and control strategy to the forefront. We now have a signed document and a way ahead, which is our roadmap that brings order to this. And make no mistake, front and center in those lines of effort is our mission partner environment, because we are never fighting by ourselves. And rather than bolting this on at the end, we're going to walk hand in hand and make sure that we know how to exchange this natively at speed, and we develop our systems concurrently. So I'm more optimistic than not. We certainly have a big road ahead of us to make these changes, but time is our enemy and time is our goal, is to take that OODA loop that we keep talking about, that decision-making cycle, and increase those RPMs while retaining accuracy.
Great, thank you. Hugely valuable to get the experience from the other side of the Atlantic. We'll move on then to Lindy to bring us back a bit closer to home again and back to the cross-government.
Thanks, Imogen, and thanks for the welcome. So my name is Lindsey Cameron, and I've been CEO of the National Cybersecurity Centre since last October. But as Imogen implied, I'm not really here solely with a cybersecurity hat on. I'm also here with 20 years of experience of civil military integration in all its guises, from the Balkans, Iraq, and Afghanistan for DFID, through leading 2 joint civil military enterprises in the PRT in Helmand in 2009 for the Foreign Office, and then a stabilization unit later. Then back to the Middle East and Africa for DFID, with stops at the Higher Command and Defence Force and RCDS along the way. And I did a final detour back to Northern Ireland for 18 months through EU exit and restoration of the Northern Ireland Executive. So it's nice to see some familiar faces in the audience. So some of you will know that that experience has made me rather an advocate of integration in all its forms and guises over the years. And I've been pretty clear that I think it's incumbent on all of us as public servants to maximise the impact we have for the UK and its various objectives laid out in the integrated review, and to optimise value for money across the different resource silos we have. I also think it's the right thing to do, frankly, because it works. But it comes with a resource bill. And the resource bill is about spending time understanding what others are trying to do and how you can help them, not just how you recruit them to support you. And if I may be frank, the scale and capability of the military means that doesn't always come naturally. Asymmetries of scale and expertise can cause frustrations for everyone. So I chuckled quietly at the question I heard earlier, which I paraphrased basically said, so won't the problem be that we're really brilliant and really fast, and can the civilians really keep up? And thought, right, okay, if that's where we're going to start the debate, then basically we'll rerun old debates rather than move on to something that is genuinely a different level of integration and a more sophisticated model. So I think nowhere is a better example of this than the cyber domain, because frankly, cyber is primarily a peaceful civilian constructed domain. It may be a vector for threats, but it's primarily a transformative technology that comes with immense opportunity. When I started working in international developments 20 years ago, we worried about telecom's landline rollouts to Africa. And the internet has transformed the possibility of connectivity for the very poorest and most remote of communities. It's equally true for the UK. In 2019, the UK digital sector employed 1.5 million people and added around £150 billion to the UK economy in a single year. The internet is something we created, it's man-made, and it's changing, and we can influence that. The primary lens in that, again, will not be military. Others have talked in different speeches, including my boss, Jeremy Fleming, about inflection points. We can influence and shape that future of the internet, and others will want to do that too, and the technology and influence for that will shift. But we must remember that we must optimize both the resilience and security and for opportunity when we do that. So for me in the National Cybersecurity Centre, the primary task is resilience. It's about making the UK the safest place to live and work online, to allow all of our citizens to benefit from that prosperity and opportunity. Just pause for a moment and think about what the last year would have been like, shopping, working, living online a decade or two ago, and how different that would have been. The economic impact has been challenging, but it could have been so much worse. Remember the week where we all shifted almost beyond our expectations to working from home, and think about the way that technology has enabled that. So my job involves everything from convincing my granny not to click on a link that says, you're being taken to court now, or HMRC wants your money, to getting boards to manage cybersecurity as another operational risk, a bit like financial risk, to trying to make the internet automatically safer. There were 80,000 reports last year by the British public, which helped us to take down scam sites to make the internet safer. And you can report those at report@phishing.gov.uk or text to 7726. So if you're a British citizen, the thing you probably worry about most is ransomware, actually, in terms of cyber threats. And admittedly, as the Foreign Secretary called out in his recent speech to Cyber UK, which I would say is, I think, the first live-streamed YouTube conference by an intelligence agency, some of those ransomware providers are indeed hosted by countries like Russia. But this is a criminal threat. It's mostly an opportunity to make money, not an act of warfare. So it's worth pausing and thinking about the context you're working in and how it looks to others in that context. Because it's also true that that has shaped the national security landscape. The digital world has changed the way we see national security. For most of my career, the departments around the National Security Council table were a pretty predictable set of national security departments. But that group has widened. The Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Support is now utterly critical to shaping the UK's digital future, leading on the Telecommunications Bill, which is the infrastructure on which the internet rests. The Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy will be at the heart of the integrated review's approach to science and technology, to strategic technical advantage, as well as to the new foreign direct investment regime outlined in the National Security and Investment Act. The Department for Education will shape the skills that we will all use in the industries that we work in. So the partners around the table, as you think about the cyber domain, are not your traditional partners, nor do they know and understand you as well as some of the rest of us do. And likewise, the range of private sector partners is wider and less traditional. Patrick referenced the Colonial Pipeline and Irish healthcare system cyber attacks. UK resilience depends on the resilience to cyber threats of the financial sector, the healthcare sector, critical national infrastructure. We in the National Cybersecurity Centre take an actor-agnostic approach, because if you're vulnerable to a cyber criminal, you are also vulnerable to hostile state actors. And it is a diverse range of people. I mean, looking around the room, I have to say that, 50% of the women in this room are on the panel. This is a group of actors who you will need to think with a diverse mix of minds, as my GCHQ colleagues will say about. And it's really important that you have that range of insights. We are national institutions that must reflect the society we come from, but we need that diversity and that range of opinions to ensure that we have the agility and speed that colleagues have talked about. So as Patrick said earlier, the Belfer Centre ranks us as a top 3 global cyber power, and that's partly because of the prescience and foresight of some of my predecessors and ministers who identified cybersecurity as a major national security issue and invested in it in the last spending review period, guided by the last cybersecurity strategy. But it's also because we in the UK had the flexibility to imagine a structure which created the National Cybersecurity Centre, which was firmly embedded both in the UK's intelligence architecture in GCHQ, but able to combine secret intelligence with industry insight to declassify rapidly, to help business understand the threats they face, and do that with embedded partners through our I-100 scheme from the private sector. We have a legal framework that makes us a genuinely democratic and responsible cyber power, but also gives us the flexibility to work across silos and boundaries to make the UK the safest place to live and work online. And our international partners are genuinely envious of the way we fuse these capabilities. In some countries, I have multiple opposite numbers, or ones who face barriers to sharing information between government and the private sector or across government departments. We shouldn't underestimate the strength of the UK's ability to think creatively about how we do that. And I know working together between GCHQ and Defence on the National Cyber Force is another example of that. Because of course we can't be complacent. The threats in cyberspace are changing, the technology is changing, the context, as we've seen with COVID, is changing. And we must aim, therefore, not only to stay ahead, but actually to make technology easier and automatically safer. And that's what we do with things like our automatic cyber defense. But we must also aim to influence the global technology standards that will shape this domain. We are good, but I also noticed one of my colleagues earlier on the platform's warnings that we're only as good as our weakest link. And it's not only individuals, but also leaders that I think are responsible for that. We spend a lot of time advising on the discussion of cyber risk at board level. If you don't prioritize that, and I think defense is an area that should be an exemplar in this space, all the way through the supply chain, both in the government department, in the military, but also in the supply chain, then you risk becoming that weakest link. So back to civil military integration and how we work together across government, I would say the key factors for me, and I don't think that this is particularly new, but I think it really is important as we move to this greater integration, is empathy for the objectives of others, self-awareness about how you appear to those others, and optimization of resources and indeed of diverse resources across all of government. As I said, I'm a convinced believer that we do this well and that we can do it even better. I think the integrated review gives us a fantastic foundation for doing so, and I look forward to joining you in the next phase of the journey.
Great, thank you, Lindy, for all the interesting comments. I will pass on now to Anthony, who I'm not sure what Anthony's going to say. Actually, I think it's going to be interesting for all of us. Go ahead.
Well, let's see. Well, thanks, Imogen, for the introduction, and thanks also for the invite, General Sanders, and also RUSI, Peter Roberts. Thanks very much. It's an honour and pleasure to be here. One of the most interesting and important sentences in the integrated review, if not a little bit ungrammatical, was this one. It declared that stronger collective strategy capability is fundamental to successful integrated implementation. Totally agreed. And strategic command is seen as central to that vision. It's the integrator that's going to deliver this collective strategy capability. So what I just want to look at today, following on from my colleagues on the panel, is two questions. How can strategic command facilitate a stronger collective, and I quote, strategy capability? How will strategic command implement multidimensional integration? And there's 3 points I want to make. First of all, what is multidimensional integration? We've heard a lot, just to confirm what we mean. And then secondly, the risks to the success of multi-dimensional integration. And finally, I'd just like to come on to some thoughts about how strategic command might reduce those risks going forward. And in fact, I think it will reduce those risks in the way that I'm going to try and articulate. So what is multi-dimensional integration? Well, if we look at those 3 documents, integrated operating concept, integrated review, defense command paper, it's very clear, they articulate it, I think, very clearly. We're talking about cross-governmental integration, cross-departmental integration, defence, security, intelligence, diplomacy, development, all fused together. The old comprehensive approach, but accelerated and accentuated. Second point, in terms of multidimensional integration, we're talking here cross-domain and jointery. And here just another quote is useful from the integrated review. This is from the Defence Command paper. We will go beyond the traditional concept of joint to a depth of multi-domain integration. So what we're talking about is a fusion of the three services, an addition of cyber and space, and an integration of cyber and space. And at the heart is really quite an ambitious vision of having a series of sensors sensing the operating environment, feeding mass big data back into the UK, which would then be analysed by machine learning, artificial intelligence, to generate a sort of threat profile and perhaps even certain courses of action, proposed courses of action. So the programme, we can see a clear vision, it's ambitious in its scale. Now, what are the risks to the success? What threatens the success, the potential success of this ambitious project? Well, if you look at these documents, the integrated review and, of course, the Defence Command paper were published in March this year. And if we look at the commentary, academic and journalistic commentary, there are three broad camps of criticism, or I might dial that down, just say three categories where commentators are concerned about the risks that the UK is running in terms of delivery. And the first, which is quite clear in that commentary, is over-ambition. Defence in a Global Age, the Defence Command paper, mentions individually 34 different countries. And clearly there is a global vision to it. And in addition to all the collective organisations, EU, NATO, UN, it has these 34 countries. Now, just let's put that in perspective. That in 2025, the UK Armed Forces will be about 135 service personnel. Just roll back to that period, 1968, 1971, when the Labour government, 68, declared a retreat from east of Suez. 71, when that retreat happened, UK Armed Forces were 390,000 soldiers, air personnel, and sailors. So, there is a scale of ambition that's an interesting one. Second point, disjointery. So, obviously, the language is of a deep integration of the services. But, of course, some commentators have commented that actually the integrated review, and especially the Defence Command paper, points to a reversion to single service. Namely, it's a platform-centric review, and the platforms that have been critical is Trident replacement, F-35, aircraft carrier, and who's paid the bill? This is the commentary. The Army has paid the bill in terms of personnel and loss of tanks and other heavy equipment. Now, of course, in the era of great power, the renewed era of great power competition, air and sea control come back into the fore. So the sort of maritime air advantages articulated in the review, it's by no means stupid or misconceived, but it does pose this risk that actually, when we talk about multidimensional integration, what we might mean is application of cyber, space, information operations to the single services, not a genuine fusion as the vision articulates. Finally, disintegration. That because there hasn't been an atrophying under the integrated review, an atrophying of the Army, and there is the platforms that have been bought off for high intensity warfare, essentially, there is a concern in the commentary that actually the integration across departments will be more difficult, that development and diplomacy become a mismatch compared with F-35s and aircraft carriers. So there's three risks that you will find in the literature as it's currently constituted. Now, the question I want to finish with is, how do those risks get reduced? How do I think that Strategic Command is going to deal with those risks? And I might call this section locating multidimensional integration. Now, on the weekend, General Sanders gave a great interview to the Telegraph, and he had this wonderful quote: "Don't get caught out, bring a computer to a knife fight." It's a great, I don't even know, maybe you didn't say it, General, I don't know, but it's, whoever invented it, it's a great quote. Now, I inferred that this meant is, look, information operations, cyber, artificial intelligence is going to be critical in the future, but it's not going to relinquish and replace hard military power. What Strategic Command is about is fusing those capabilities, fusing the virtual, the cyber, with real military capabilities for deterrence, but also for high-end war fighting. And of course, Lieutenant General Magowan has just emphasised the importance of targeting. So there's going to be a concentration of effects, to use the word, in particular places. So the question then is, what is a multidimensional knife fight going to look like in the next decade, the next 2 decades? And this is what I'd like to finish with. Now, here's a remarkable fact, that I found reading these 3 documents. Smart city is mentioned once in the integrated review. There is no mention of the urban environment or cities in any of the other documents. Now, this is remarkable. If you look at the literature on the transformation of warfare over the last 20, 25 years, with almost boring regularity, scholars and practitioners are going on and on about the urban explosion of the 21st century. 3.5 billion of us live in cities, and they are petri dishes of conflict. So what I would suggest is, if we're thinking about targeting our multidimensional operations and thinking of a strategy rather than a policy, I think we've got to think about the urban environment. Let's think of an example. What would be the best one? For me, the Battle of Mosul, October 2016 to July 2017, a fight that's widely regarded as the biggest urban fight Western coalition forces have been involved in since the Second World War. Now, look, that battle at the street level, the brutality was of an ancient type, ancient in its horrors and brutality. But simultaneously with these horrors at street level, coalition commanders under Operation Inherent Resolve were conducting a very sophisticated multidimensional operation in the informational space and in the cyberspace. And one of the commanders, the US commanders of that coalition, said, as a result of these operations, I was confident we were living in the minds of ISIS commanders rent-free. Simultaneously, they were messaging ISIS fighters and Moslawis in order to try and disaggregate local ISIS fighters from foreign fighters. Now, what was even more interesting was that this multidimensional strategy was not local to Mosul. On the contrary, Mosul is not an isolated city. It's part of a global urban archipelago. And that archipelago, of course, included the city of Marawi, which blew up in an ISIS counterattack from the summer of 2017. But actually, in a real sense, Mosul was connected with London. Mohammed Imwazi, aka Jihadi John, was brought up in Queen's Park. Shamima Begum was brought up in Bethnal Green. So we have this extraordinary urban network where there's resonances across the topography of the global archipelago, which coalition commanders in fighting Mosul were aware of. So what I'd suggest is, as Strategic Command tries to implement a vision of multidimensional integration, I would recommend it focuses on key cities, on key areas in cities, and of course, in the grey zone, and especially in this integrated departmental zone where we're looking at crisis prevention, stopping terrorism, stopping organised crime, I think the urban focus becomes even more relevant. So let me absolutely conclude now. I think the ambition for multidimensional integration for Strategic Command is absolutely right. I think this very ambitious global vision is right. But to enact that vision, my prediction would be, and my recommendation would be, that Strategic Command acts very locally. Thanks very much.